is one of those videos that's going to go pretty deep. And again, if you are one of the people who watch my videos or understand what I speak to, this won't be so tough for you. So once the ancients understood that everything came into existence because of consciousness and energy, they then had to understand that we, at our purest form, are consciousness and energy. We are the result of consciousness creating energy, energy creating matter. Now, how did this begin? Consciousness became aware of itself. How do we become aware? We focus, we concentrate. Meditation is how we use consciousness to affect the physical world. And our physical world would be our bodies. So understand, consciousness created everything that we see, everything that we physically experience. We are consciousness, but we forgot how to control our consciousness to affect our physical bodies and our physical world. Our subconscious has all the information locked away within it on exactly how to do this, how to control the physical world, how to control our bodies. But we have to access it, and that's easier said than done. Now, one of the things you have to understand is, from my knowledge, nobody has ever been able to do this. It definitely hasn't happened to where the person was able to do this and remain in the physical form. Anybody who has possibly achieved this did not remain in the physical form and, ascended. So it's tough for people to kind of comprehend this, consciousness to energy, energy to matter, because it's tough to understand something seemingly coming from nothing at all. This is why I gave you the example, using sex, using sexual stimulation, about how the thought of sex can cause you to become aroused, man or woman. So the thought, it begins with a thought. You could be looking at something sexual and still become stimulated. So you have thought, which that thought is your consciousness. Consciousness then sends that energy to the hippocampus, down the fibers of the cortical plexus, to the fornix, down the spine, to the sacral nerve, and causes stimulation. So we can see again from thought, consciousness, we have something coming from, nothing, seemingly nothing, to create all of this stimulation. But we understand even still the stimulation or the consciousness that's going to create this energy is coming from what we're watching or reading or thinking about. So even just thoughts alone can cause this stimulation. It's something that's unbelievable, but it's the best way to break it down on a basic level to understand that something comes from nothing inside you all the time. Again, before you move, before you make any kind of movement, it happens so fast. There is a thought that is processed. And we have been, conditioned to do this really quick. And it's fluent. Our movement, we move and don't even realize that we're thinking about doing it before we actually do it. Because the action is so fast, we can't even comprehend it, the speed consciously. So we move. So even, when I move my hands and everything, even when you do the same thing, there is a thought that you had in your brain telling you to do that, putting out the signal, the information to your body to do it before you do it. And it happens super speed. So it's amazing when you really get into it. The problem is, since we don't understand these little things, it has never been broken down to us in, such a way, even in school. We don't pick up on this stuff, because once you start picking up on it, you start getting deeper into what the body and consciousness and energy is all about. And this is something that they don't want to happen, of course. So let's take this a different route, a more complex route. Let's take this to creation itself. Because once you start to understand creation itself and how we came into existence, then you get to start to really get a grasp and understand consciousness, energy to matter. And you understand, one, consciousness to energy to these elements. We understand, one, everything is made up of atoms. There's no way around that. We can take it deeper and go into, quarks and string theory or what have you, but let's keep it simple. But when we understand that you have atoms, you have the energy creating these elements, creating atoms or what have you, and we understand that this goes back to our DNA. And our DNA has all those elements that consciousness creating energy, energy creating the elements. These elements are within our DNA. So when we get into briefly, about creation and understanding what DNA is and what it contains. When you start digging into this, there's no way you won't come to the same conclusion as me in understanding that, one, there is no way that we were an accident. We were just created out of thin air. That when you see how complex it is to create a human being, to create what we are, there's no way this is something that just happened accidentally. This is something that was a lot of conscious effort, a lot of conscious thought went into our creation. You understand what I mean, on a brief level. But when you understand DNA and the elements that it contains, we know we have carbon, we have hydrogen, we have oxygen, we have nitrogen, we have phosphorus. We have also within us, we have iron, we have calcium, we have copper, we have manganese, we have zinc, we have iodine. We have a lot of metals and non-metals within us, just like the planet itself. So you understand that these elements all have atomic numbers. And atomic numbers because they contain atoms. They are made up of atoms. So for example, you have the atomic number of 20. 20 gives us calcium. And 20 meaning that you talk about electrons, protons, and neutrons, atoms. So we have these electrons within these elements. That is the energetic part of them, understanding energy. But we have these atoms in everything. So when you understand, one, calcium makes up our bones. So when you go back again to consciousness, creating energy creating these elements is going to form our DNA. Calcium, 20, the atomic number 20, that's our bone structure right there. So we can see how this goes. So in understanding that, you can understand it's impossible when you think about the many combinations that have to happen with atoms to create these elements to give us the human body. That would be like if we were an accident, we were just something that was created, accidentally or by coincidence. That would be like taking a bucket of Legos, put a bunch of Legos in a bucket, and then throwing the bucket of Legos in the air, and then they perfectly forming, the shape of a man. That's what people are saying if they believe we just came together as a result of, some kind of evolution or some kind of accident. It's bullshit. You got to pay attention and look at how complex this stuff is. And there's no way you can put a bunch of Legos in a bucket, throw it up in the air, and you just have a human shape, a body shape. Consciousness comes into play. So when you think about when your child takes Legos, when you take some Legos and you have to really consciously think about what you want to create first. You have a thought in your head and you go and you build it with the Legos. The same thing with us. You have to understand the Legos, the size, the shape, what fits where. It's the same thing with these elements. You have to understand what they do. You have to understand how many atoms is going to make this element. How many atoms is going to make this? How many atoms is going to make that? And once you have this complex understanding of once you do put these atoms together and you get these other elements, what do they do? How are they going to work? And then we're talking about complexity, serious complexity, and putting together a body, not just human body, but even animals and everything else. And when you start getting into DNA and how complex it is and the information that it holds, you see that this is something that is seriously impossible to just, throw together. So we know DNA is the chemical that carries our genetic code from one generation to the next. Our cells are created to basically house our DNA. Our cells are mostly made up of hydrogen and oxygen, 59% hydrogen, 24% oxygen, but it also contains carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and so on and so forth, other elements as well. So when you understand that we're talking about DNA that contains so many different elements, and why these elements may have different names, again, they are all made up of atoms, a whole bunch of atoms. And again, when you talk about you have to get so many different amounts of atoms to create these different elements. So we're talking about multiple combinations of atoms to give us these elements. So you can have, our DNA can contain billions of atoms within one cell. So we're talking about billions of atoms within one single cell. So when you think about billions of atoms, billions we're talking in one cell, and you think about how many cells we have in our body, this is why people say, you know, we're made up of trillions of atoms. We're talking about a lot of energy, all of this coming into play because of consciousness creating this energy creating these elements that we're talking about when we're talking about hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen, you know, phosphorus and everything like that. So when you start getting into this stuff, again, it's mind-boggling. It tells you, one, you know, this is something that is complex, and we're talking about all of this energy, all of these atoms in one single cell. This is something that is seriously, you know, complex and that has to be well thought up of. So we know that DNA is a nucleic acid, and nucleic acid is basically a nucleotide. We won't get into nucleotides too much, but there are two types of nucleic acids. We have DNA, we have RNA. Now DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, RNA, ribonucleic acid, they both have 4 smaller nucleic acids. So with DNA, you have adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine. Now, RNA has all of those as well, except for thymine. Instead of thymine, it has uracil. So we're talking about DNA, RNA, these genetic codes containing all this information that's basically going to make up our human structure, our human bodies, and all the cells and organs or what have you. When you put a combination of many different atoms coming together to give us these elements. So when you think about our bone structure, I talked about with calcium, think about our organs and everything like that. We are talking about different combinations of atoms, elements coming together to give us this structure. So now again, DNA contains the genetic code that's going to allow you to transfer information from one generation to another. But understand, DNA cannot, inside of the nucleus, from inside the nucleus, transfer that information out. So basically, when the DNA is inside of the nucleus, it's basically locked into the cell. It can't transfer that information out. This is where RNA comes in. And there's 3 types of RNA. You have messenger RNA, you have ribosomal RNA, which is rRNA, and ribosomal RNA basically gets the information from the messenger DNA and basically decodes it. And then you have transfer DNA, which is going to transfer that transfer RNA, which is going to transfer that message into proteins and basically continue to create the process, create the structure. So you have the RNA go into the nucleus of the cell, basically copy the DNA because it leaves the DNA intact inside the cell. It doesn't take the whole genetic code out because, you know, it'll collapse. But it takes the information from the nucleus of the cell, the DNA, makes a copy of it, then comes out of the nucleus and then goes on ahead, process it, and then goes on ahead to continue to spread out the information to create, you know, who you will become. Because everything that you are is locked within that DNA. Everything. So you have the combination of your parents coming together and creating this new DNA. Everything we're talking about, from everything, from all time, from both of your creations, is locked in there. So you take this information and think about how the RNA goes in there and basically takes the genetic code to continue to process, to begin to make up the rest of you. Because remember, you know, once that melanin explosion happened and, you know, conception is done and over with, and, you know, a child is going to be born, it's not completely intact. That's something we'll touch on later. But you have to understand that it's a lot of work that happens from that point. And it's a lot that is done. And the fact that this is seemingly this automatic process that's in our DNA, that once it's there and the process starts to happen, you have at work energy creating us, energy creating animals, energy creating planets, all these elements unraveling from energy because of consciousness. This is something that has to be consciously thought of. in order for it to happen. And this is really deep that we're going to touch into, because you have to really think about what I just said. This is something that consciously had to be thought of, in order to bring this stuff into existence. By no means could this be an accident when you think about that type of complexity. Perfect analogy. Putting Legos into a trash can, throw it up in the air. If a human being comes down, I'm wrong. So now, when you look at all of the metals and non-metals that we are made up of, I talked about before how we have iron and copper and manganese and zinc, iodine, all these metals within us. You also find these metals within the planet itself. So when I talked about before how our planet was created as a result of a supernova, so you have to understand the last element to be produced before a supernova happens, before that major explosion happens, the last element to be produced is iron. Iron is produced. So you have the majority of the core of the earth is formed by iron. And we find it everywhere. We find all these elements throughout the planet. And I talked about Dr. Manhattan from the movie The Watchmen, from the comic book, I should say, Watchmen. Now, Mr. Manhattan, Dr. Manhattan, basically, he had his body, he had his flesh basically destroyed. He was converted into pure energy. And because he understood how the body is constructed, he was able to pull himself together. But he was first, basically converted into energy. Energy is seen and unseen. We'll talk about that a little bit here. And this is something the ancient Egyptians talked about. But he was converted into pure energy. Because he had this knowledge, he could pull himself, back together. Now, the symbol that he took, that he put on his forehead, is a symbol of the hydrogen atom. And that's amazing that he took that symbol, but it's trying to tell you something that he took, the hydrogen atom. Now, I talked about this before in a previous DVD about how when you look at the periodic tables, all the periodic tables of elements, all the elements contain hydrogen atoms. They are basically hydrogen atoms, different amounts of hydrogen atoms. When I say hydrogen atoms, I'm talking about atoms. The same thing I said before about how atoms make up all these elements is the same. Hydrogen atoms. So he took the symbol of the hydrogen atom, which we can go back and look at that symbol in ancient times. It also can represent the sun. It also can represent Saturn. So everything that they're trying to show you in that movie, The Watchmen, which we'll talk about a little bit more in this video because it has a lot in it. Everything they're trying to show you in that movie, in The Watchmen, about Dr. Manhattan, they are expressing what we are in essence and what we could do if we control our energy and consciousness, which would be in essence controlling our hydrogen atoms and being able to do some amazing stuff. You've seen what he can do in that movie, and you have to think about that. Again, this is stuff that seems far-fetched and far off, but when you understand what we're talking about, so we have to understand that they are telling us that our solar system, the planets, are a result of an accident, of a big bang. So we got to go deeper into that whole thing and understand the process of a supernova and what happens and why it happens and is it supposed to happen. This is something that they don't really touch on too much. They give us the process and what happened, what causes a star to explode, but we can't look at that and just say it's a coincidence. There has to be more deeper reasoning behind that. So they tell us that, Earth is unique, that there is nothing like Earth. It's unique. If it was 1 degree higher or lower, everybody would be dead. No life could survive on this place. But you have to look at that and understand that they're telling us that because they want us to think that this, Earth is a coincidence, that it just came up out of nowhere as a coincidence, that we are here and everything here is a coincidence, it's by chance. And this is something that when you understand how complex things are, you simply can't accept, being an intelligent person. But you also have to look at the fact that one, the moon perfectly aligns with the sun to give us, the eclipse. Can't be a coincidence. You have to look at the fact that one, if Jupiter wasn't in the position that it's in right now, basically blocking the asteroid belt, we'd probably been, wiped out a long time ago by, meteors or comets or asteroids or what have you. But Jupiter blocks all of that traffic for us. So we can't think about planets, we can't think about atoms and think about this stuff as being an accident. It's deeper. So, this is where it gets really deep. Now, as I said, consciousness needs existence. Consciousness needs something to perceive in order to expand. Plain and simple. Now, you can't have nothing, absolutely nothing, and try to expand consciousness, because consciousness has nothing to perceive in order to grow. Now, again, as I said, when consciousness became aware of itself being something, it can move. Existence being something, it can move, it can begin to grow. This is like going really, really deep into it when you really think about it. The beginning, consciousness, becoming aware, consciousness perceiving itself. So without perception, there is no reality. There is nothing that can happen. You need something to perceive. You need to be able to perceive. But for most of us, you can't just, teach your son about trigonometry if you never learned it yourself. You will be clueless. All of us remember being a kid, being in elementary school, being in the classroom, and then your teacher goes to the chalkboard and she writes this crazy division problem on the chalkboard, or this crazy math problem on the chalkboard, and you're looking at it like, oh my God, what is this? Chalkboard might as well be blank because you have no clue what it is or how to solve it. So over time, as you are taught, as you learn, you begin to understand how to do the math problem. You begin to learn how to solve it. And, you study. And what do people tell you when you study? Concentrate, focus. But in essence, what are you really doing as it pertains to school, as it pertains to learning? What are you doing? You are memorizing. You are memorizing. You're not learning anything new. You're memorizing what has already existed. So the formula, the process, the steps of solving math problems has already been thought of. It has already been thought of. It has already been done and put out there. All you have to do is memorize it. You have to memorize it. Once you memorize the process, memorize the steps and the rules, you can go ahead and do the problem. Now, as a result of you memorizing these steps, you can solve the problem. You can now do math. You are now smarter, as we would say. So we go ahead and we look at the process of school, the process of schooling, the process of education. And it's not so much learning, it's memorizing. All of this stuff existed already. You are memorizing what has already been solved. We get textbooks in school. When you get a history book, history has happened already. You are memorizing the events that took place. When you get this information about biology, all the information about biology, science, math, or what have you has been solved. You are memorizing what has been solved. It's nothing new. Even when you put it into context of an invention, even if you come up with an invention, you will say, well, I invented something new. Well, not really. The components that make up your invention has already been invented. They have already existed long before you invented them. What is new, what is unique is the idea. That's something that's new. But you have to understand that even the idea is based off of something that existed. So when we look at the invention of the automobile, he got that idea because of the horse and wagon. And he basically said, hey, we need a faster means of transportation. But because the horse and wagon had already existed, he got the idea of a faster means of transportation and became, it became eventually the automobile. He came up with the car. But the components that, make up a car, the wheel, all the rubber and all that stuff, it has already existed before, he came up with the idea. Once he got the idea, because he had the knowledge about all of these different components that, make up a car, because he understood and remembered what each particular item does, each particular working part in the automobile does, because he had the knowledge and understanding about all these different components, he was able to understand that if I put all of these components together, I can create this idea that I have. So when you think about it, you take this stuff back. We're still talking about one memory, but it goes back to consciousness and memory. Now, memory is you accessing your consciousness and remembering what you had already thought of, what you had already perceived. I talked about before how you can go out and look around and you can see so many different things, and it will be hard for you to come back home and draw it, but your subconscious picks that up. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But all this stuff is based on memory. We are memorizing so many different things, and when you read books, you're reading them, you're learning, you're memorizing what you read in a book, and you're storing that as new information. But really, these are things that had already happened, already took place. So we base, in our society, we base intelligence off of how much a person can remember. If a person can remember a lot in detail, we say this person is intelligent. Because you remember it so much in detail, you seem like a smart, intelligent person. But really, we're talking about memory. You just memorized all of this stuff. So going back to Dr. Manhattan, he was able to reform himself because he memorized, he remembered the human body and how to put himself back together. He remembered what was connected to what. You can solve this math problem right here because you remember what you was taught. It's easy, but to somebody who doesn't have any clue about math, it's a tough problem. Might as well be blank. But because you remember what you was taught, you can solve that math problem. The car, the automobile was put together again because he remembered how all these individual components work, and if he put them together, what it will create. Our solar system, our planet, is created because consciousness remembered how to recreate them because it has already created them before. Plain and simple. This stuff is because of memory. Going back to DNA, genetic code, how all this stuff is created based upon the information stored within DNA that is passed down generation to generation. You get creation because something pre-existed and now it's going to recreate what pre-existed. The same thing with our solar system and planets. We are made up of the same stuff. This stardust will basically be the genetic makeup of everything. But because it pre-existed, it was able to reform itself. So remember, our solar system is supposed to be 4 billion years old, but 13 billion years is supposed to be the entire universe, which I think is bullshit. I think it's infinite and it has always existed somehow, some way, something that we can't perceive in our present form. But you have to remember, even still, if we use the numbers, we're talking about billions of years that have existed before we existed, before the system existed. So the understanding of this solar system coming into existence has already existed. Therefore, it was able to recreate itself from a supernova. And what happens after the supernova? The supernova recreates these planets, but also recreates itself and turns back into a sun. It's amazing. So the ancient Egyptians talked about man, know thyself. Remember who you are. Because you can't move forward if you don't remember the past. If you don't remember how you learn or what you learn in order to feed yourself, in order to survive and take care of yourself, you're going to die. So you got to remember who you are. Remember what you learn. Remember these things that matter so you can create, new, bigger, better things. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, that the ancient Egyptians was completely focused, as I always talk about. They was focused on the past. They was focused on things that they used to do. They were trying to remember what they did, how they did it. And they slowly began to remember. They began to put the pieces back together. And we can see from the dynasties that it's a lot of things that they begin to remember that we find in the dynastic period that's still amazing. Now, I touched on this before about the dream state. And understanding when you go outside and you perceive reality, when you start looking around at everything, you yourself consciously may not understand what you're looking at. It's a building, it's a car, it's what have you. But your consciousness, by one look, decodes the entire building, decodes everything that you're looking at and stores that information. It knows it. So when you go to sleep and you dream, you're in the dream state and your consciousness, your subconscious, projects it out in the dream world, and it seems so real. The buildings downtown, so real. Your living room, the barbershop, everything seems so real. All the people seem real, including you. But think about this, and this is crazy. Think about this. what are you in a dream state? What is that? What are you? You are not flesh and blood. In the dream state, what are you? In reality, you're in the bed, on the couch, on the floor, wherever, knocked out, sleep. That's where your physical being is really at in reality at the moment of sleep. Your body is in the bed. But in the dream state, what the hell is that? It seems so real. It seems like an actual physical person, but it's not. What is it? Residual self-memory. It's the mental projection of your digital self. Sounds familiar? Or the mental projection of your energetic self, projected into the dream world, plain and simple. So just like Dr. Manhattan was able to remember how to reform himself in Watchmen, every night that you go to sleep, you are able to reform yourself in the dream state because your subconscious remembers how. Because it's done it before when it created you, because all the information is right there. Remember, talked about this before, your subconscious has all the information locked away. It's all there. Everything you need to know about yourself is within your DNA, it's within the cells. And we're talking about electrical signals, we're talking about energy that your subconscious can just grab, decode, and there you are in the matrix. There you are in the dream world, right there. Your whole physical body, you can see sometimes from third person, sometimes you see it as if normal, and it seems so real. Yet, it's not flesh. You're touching stuff, it feels real. What is that? You have to think about this stuff.